welcome to the channel. Today we've got something incredible for you. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. It was a quiet evening in the old manor, the kind of silence that whispers secrets. Lady Eleanor, standing by the garden gate, could feel the weight of a forgotten past slowly creeping back into the present. The letters she'd thought were finally put to rest. Were they truly gone? Or was the garden hiding one last truth, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself? Chapter 1. The Mysterious Garden. The evening was tinged with the golden hues of a setting sun as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson approached the grand estate nestled on the outskirts of London. The autumn air, crisp and cool, seemed to hum with the quiet beauty of the season. The soft rustle of falling leaves echoed around them as the path they trod led them to an iron gate, worn with age and ivy. It was a place that held both charm and mystery. Watson, his ever-present curiosity piqued, glanced around. Holmes, I must admit, I have no idea what to expect from this case. A garden filled with forgotten letters. It sounds like something out of a novel. Holmes, with his keen eyes glinting beneath the shadow of his cap, smiled slightly. Ah, Watson, there is no mystery too peculiar for us to uncover. Lady Eleanor's request was brief, but something about it feels different. You can sense it too, can't you? Watson, ever the companion, was content to follow Holmes, trusting his brilliant mind. What do you think it could be, Holmes? Why would she write to you about letters hidden in a garden? Holmes's gaze softened for a moment as though lost in thought. The truth, Watson, often hides where it is least expected. A garden, you say? Perhaps there is something buried within that speaks of more than mere horticulture. We shall soon see. As they approached the entrance to the manor, a butler greeted them and led them inside. The large oak doors creaked open, revealing a house steeped in history. It was the sort of place where every piece of furniture, every rug, every painting seemed to tell a story, and yet there was an air of sadness hanging over it. A quiet melancholy lingered in the walls, as though something important had been lost. Lady Eleanor, a woman in her early 50s, greeted them with a graceful, albeit anxious, smile. Her hair was carefully arranged, but her hands betrayed her anxiety. They trembled as she shook Holmes's hand, and there was a distinct shadow of worry in her eyes. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, thank you for coming, she began, her voice soft but filled with an undercurrent of urgency. I fear I am at a loss. You are my last hope. Holmes, ever the master of reading human nature, studied her with a calm intensity, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in every detail. Lady Eleanor, there is no need for alarm. We are here to assist you. Please tell us what troubles you. She led them to a drawing room, where the fire crackled gently in the hearth. The room was cozy, yet the unease radiating from Lady Eleanor created an unsettling contrast to the comfort of the setting. You see, she began, her voice trembling slightly. There is a garden on my property, a place that has always been a refuge for me. But recently, it has become unsettling. I have discovered letters, Mr. Holmes. Old, forgotten letters. They are not mine, nor are they addressed to me. They are written by someone I do not know. But they are here, in my garden, hidden among the ivy and roses. Holmes's eyes flickered with intrigue. Letters, you say? But why hidden? And who do they belong to? Lady Eleanor hesitated, wringing her hands in her lap. I do not know. That is what I need you to help me uncover. They seem to appear out of nowhere, as though they are planted there, waiting for me to find them. I have searched the garden thoroughly, but there is no sign of who could have left them. It is as if they belong to a different time altogether. Holmes's mind immediately began to whirl with possibilities, each more perplexing than the last. "And you have not been able to trace the origin of these letters?" Lady Eleanor shook her head. "No, they are always unsigned, except for a name on the back of each envelope. But the name, well, I am certain I do not recognize it. And yet, there is something strangely familiar about it. It haunts me." Watson, who had been listening intently, could not help but ask, "What is this name, Lady Eleanor?" Her eyes seemed to flicker with fear. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "The name is Henry. Lord Henry." The name struck Holmes like a sudden gust of wind, and for a moment there was an almost imperceptible change in his demeanour. He did not let it show, but Watson, ever observant, could tell that something about this name resonated with Holmes. "Lord Henry?" Watson asked, intrigued. "Is that someone from your past, Lady Eleanor?" Lady Eleanor's face flushed with a deep, sorrowful emotion. "Lord Henry was my late husband," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "He passed away many years ago. But I never knew him to write these letters. They speak of love, of regret, of promises made, but they are not from him. I cannot understand why they are here, why they have returned now. It is as though he is trying to tell me something from beyond the grave." Holmes sat back in his chair, his gaze never leaving Lady Eleanor's face. "I see. And you believe these letters may hold a key to something long buried?" Lady Eleanor nodded, her eyes welling with unshed tears. "I do not know, Mr. Holmes. I only know that they feel important, as though they are leading me somewhere. I fear that if I do not understand their meaning, something terrible will happen." A heavy silence hung in the room, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Holmes sat motionless for a moment, considering the gravity of the situation. He could feel the weight of the mystery pressing down on him, drawing him deeper into its folds. Something was amiss. The letters, the garden, the name of Lord Henry, all were threads that needed to be unravelled. "Very well, Lady Eleanor," Holmes said at last, his voice steady and reassuring. "We will investigate this matter. You need not worry any longer. We will find the answers." Lady Eleanor exhaled a breath she did not know she had been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I can never express how much this means to me." As Holmes and Watson prepared to leave the drawing room, Holmes turned to Lady Eleanor with one last question. "There is one more thing, Lady Eleanor. You mentioned that you feel as though someone is watching you. Is that still the case?" Her eyes widened, and a faint tremor ran through her voice as she nodded. "Yes, I cannot shake the feeling that I am being observed, not just by the garden, but by someone who knows about the letters." Holmes's sharp mind was already spinning with possibilities. "We shall proceed carefully, Lady Eleanor. Stay close and keep your mind clear. We will uncover the truth." As they exited the room and made their way toward the garden, a subtle tension filled the air, and Holmes's thoughts raced. There was something more to this case than met the eye, something beyond the hidden letters and the whispers of love. The garden, the forgotten messages, and the haunting presence of Lord Henry were only the beginning of a mystery that would soon unfold, one that promised to reveal secrets that had long remained buried. Chapter 2. The Garden's Secrets. The morning that followed was calm, the kind of stillness that blankets everything in a soothing hush. The sun, still low in the sky, cast long shadows across the countryside as Holmes and Watson made their way to the garden. The dew on the grass glistened like tiny diamonds, each drop reflecting the pale light of dawn. It was a tranquil scene, but Holmes's sharp instincts told him that tranquility, in this case, was a mere illusion. Beneath the surface, something stirred. Lady Eleanor had led them down a winding path, bordered by thick hedges and rows of flowers that seemed to pulse with life. Yet there was something haunting about the way the garden seemed to swallow the light. The air smelled faintly of roses and earth, yet there was an underlying chill that lingered, like a forgotten memory trying to claw its way to the surface. Holmes's gaze was fixed, not on the beauty of the flowers, but on the garden's composition, how the paths twisted unnaturally, how the stone walls were overgrown with ivy, as though they had been intentionally allowed to swallow everything in their path. The silence felt heavy, oppressive even, and there was a certain stillness that made Holmes's senses prick with unease. "Watson, observe carefully," Holmes murmured, his voice barely rising above the rustling leaves. "Do you notice the way the garden is laid out? It is not organic. It has been sculpted intentionally, as though it has a story to tell, but only if you are willing to listen." Watson glanced around, his gaze drifting to the old stone walls that loomed over them like silent sentinels. The ivy clung tightly to the surface as though it had been there for decades, perhaps longer. In fact, everything about the garden seemed old, forgotten even. But it was not just the age that unnerved Watson, it was the unnatural order of it all. "I see what you mean, Holmes," Watson said, his voice hushed. "It does not feel like a natural garden. The pathways lead nowhere. The flowers seem almost too deliberate in their arrangement." Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. "Exactly, Watson. It is as if someone is trying to hide something, something beneath the surface, something buried within the earth itself." They continued down the path, which led them deeper into the heart of the garden. There, in the farthest corner, hidden from the casual observer, was a small, weathered bench. Its paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood exposed to the elements. Surrounding it was a ring of overgrown lilacs and ferns. The air grew thick, as though the garden itself were holding its breath. "Here we are," Holmes said quietly, his eyes scanning the area with the intensity of a hawk. "The heart of the mystery." Watson stepped forward, feeling a strange pull toward the bench. It felt significant, though he could not explain why. He knelt down beside it and ran his fingers along the ground, where the grass had been pressed down, as if someone, or something, had been there recently. Holmes moved with his usual grace, kneeling beside Watson to examine the area. His eyes narrowed as they traced the contours of the bench, the stone, and the earth around it. Then, without a word, Holmes stood, his mind already working through the possibilities. "This is the spot," Holmes said, a note of finality in his voice. "The letters, they were meant to be found here." Watson looked up at him, his brow furrowed. "But how can you be so sure, Holmes?" "It's just a bench in a forgotten corner of a garden." Holmes gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Not just any bench, Watson. Look closely." Holmes bent down, brushing aside the ferns that had grown around the base of the bench. There, hidden in the overgrown roots, was a small wooden box, weathered and buried beneath layers of moss. It was as if the earth itself had tried to keep it hidden, yet it had somehow remained just within reach. Watson's breath caught in his throat. "Another one of the letters?" Holmes nodded, carefully retrieving the box from its resting place. His fingers were gentle, as though he were handling something fragile. As he lifted the box, the air seemed to change, as though the very garden had exhaled, releasing the tension that had been building for years. He opened it slowly, revealing several pieces of paper, folded neatly and tied together with a worn ribbon. Watson leaned in closer, his heart racing with anticipation. "What does it say, Holmes?" Holmes's fingers hovered over the papers for a moment, as though he were savouring the weight of the moment. He untied the ribbon, carefully unfolding the first letter. As he read it aloud, his voice was calm and steady, yet there was an underlying tension in the words he spoke. "To my dearest Eleanor," Holmes began, his voice echoing softly in the quiet garden. "I write this letter with a heart heavy with regret. Our time together was brief, yet it has haunted me ever since. I fear that the secrets I have kept from you will now be my undoing. There is something I must tell you, something that I have hidden in the garden itself, beneath the very earth that once flourished with life." Holmes paused, his brow furrowed. The letter continued with cryptic lines about promises, forgotten memories, and a hidden truth that could never be revealed. It was a confession, a final attempt to communicate something important. But the question remained. What was it? And why had it been left in such a way? "The garden," Holmes said softly, his eyes flicking to the surrounding foliage. "It holds the answers. Lord Henry must have known something that could not be spoken aloud. And so he left his message hidden here, among the flowers and the roots, hoping that one day someone would find it." Watson stood beside him, his mind racing. But why not tell Lady Eleanor directly? Why leave these letters in such an indirect way? Holmes turned to face him, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity. "The answer is clear, Watson. These letters are not meant to be read all at once. They are part of a puzzle, a series of clues that, when pieced together, will reveal the truth. And the garden itself is the key." There was a long silence as Holmes and Watson stood together, the weight of the mystery pressing in around them. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver through the air. But despite the chill, the garden had become a place of silent anticipation, as though it were waiting for them to uncover its secrets. Holmes carefully placed the letter back into the box and shut it with a soft click. "We will return here, Watson. But we must proceed with caution. There is more to this than we have yet uncovered." As they made their way back toward the manor, the garden seemed to watch them, its silence now all the more oppressive. The mystery, which had begun with a single letter, had grown deeper and more complex. The garden was no longer just a place of beauty. It was a labyrinth, one that held secrets that could change everything. And as Holmes looked back at the ivy-clad walls of the garden, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by the living, but by the echoes of the past. The story was only beginning, and its ending was still shrouded in shadow. Chapter 3. The Unsolved Riddle. The days had grown shorter, and the autumn chill seemed to settle deeper into the bones of the countryside. As the sun dipped lower each evening, casting long shadows across the garden, Holmes and Watson found themselves entrenched in the mystery of the forgotten letters. The quiet, rural estate had become their canvas, an eerie, silent world where every rustle of a leaf and every creak of the ancient stone walls seemed to whisper secrets of the past. Holmes was uncharacteristically quiet as he sat in the drawing room, his mind immersed in the puzzle at hand. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a flickering glow over the room. Watson, who had been reviewing the letters once more, looked up, noticing his friend's unusual stillness. "Holmes," Watson said gently, "you've been quiet for hours. What are you thinking?" Holmes, his fingers steepled in concentration, looked up at Watson with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "The letters, Watson. They are not just mere words on paper. They are a puzzle, each one a piece of a larger story. But the trick is not in reading them. It is in understanding the intent behind them. Whoever left these letters wanted us to follow a certain path. But why? What is the purpose of this trail?" Watson leaned forward, intrigued. I thought the purpose was clear, to reveal something Lord Henry never had the chance to tell Lady Eleanor. But the mystery seems to deepen with each letter we find. What do you think the path leads to? Holmes sat back, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. That is what we must determine, Watson. The answers lie not only in the words themselves, but in the way they are presented, how they are hidden, and more importantly, why they were kept from Lady Eleanor for so long. For days, Holmes and Watson combed through the letters, each more cryptic than the last. But no matter how hard they tried, no direct answers emerged. The letters were filled with sorrow, regret, and promises made in secret. Yet, none of them told a story with a beginning, middle, and end. Instead, they left Holmes with a nagging feeling, a sense that something was missing, something vital that lay just beyond his grasp. As Holmes stared into the fire, Watson spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Holmes, do you believe these letters are truly from Lord Henry, or could someone else be behind them? Someone manipulating Lady Eleanor?" Holmes's sharp gaze flickered to Watson, as if the question had opened a new door in his mind. "That is an interesting thought, Watson. For if these letters are truly the work of Lord Henry, then they would be a confession, a means of revealing his deepest emotions and regrets. But if someone else is behind them, that would change everything. It would mean that someone is attempting to deceive Lady Eleanor, to lead her down a path that isn't her own." The fire crackled loudly, the sound filling the silence that followed. Watson's mind raced. But who would do such a thing? And why? Holmes rose from his seat, pacing the room with his usual energy. "The question, Watson, is not just who, but why. What is the end game here? What is the one thing that has remained hidden from Lady Eleanor all these years? We must find the answer, for it lies at the heart of this riddle." They turned their attention to the garden once more. It had become the focal point of their investigation, the place where the letters were hidden, and the place where the mystery seemed to draw them like a magnet. Holmes had noted the peculiar arrangement of the garden, the deliberate twists and turns of the paths, the overgrown corners where the letters had been found. There was something almost otherworldly about the space, as if it were a living, breathing entity with secrets buried beneath its surface. As the sun sank lower, casting an amber glow over the garden, Holmes and Watson ventured back to the heart of it, the corner where the bench had stood. Holmes felt a sudden sense of urgency. There was something they had missed before, something that had been right in front of them the entire time. "Watson, come quickly!" Holmes called, his voice laced with excitement. Watson hurried to his side, where Holmes was kneeling beside the stone wall, his fingers brushing over the ivy that clung to it. Holmes's expression was one of quiet triumph as he spoke. "The ivy. It's been moved." Watson's brow furrowed in confusion. "Moved? But how? The ivy is thick. No one could have..." Holmes stood and gestured for Watson to come closer. "Exactly. That's what makes this so intriguing. The ivy is thick, but it has been deliberately pulled aside. Someone has hidden something here, something important." Holmes began to peel back the ivy with careful precision, revealing a small, weathered stone tablet embedded in the wall. It was barely visible beneath the green cover, but as Holmes's fingers traced the edges, it became clear that it was not just a natural feature of the wall. It was something deliberately placed. Watson gasped. "What is it, Holmes?" Holmes studied the stone tablet intently. "A symbol," he murmured. "This is not just any stone. It's an ancient symbol. A marker. Someone wanted to ensure that it would remain hidden, but they also wanted it to be found eventually. It's a clue that ties this entire mystery together." The symbol, though worn with time, depicted a labyrinthine design, A winding maze with a single narrow path leading to the center. It was an old, mysterious symbol, one that Holmes had seen before, but he couldn't quite place it. "This is the key to everything, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and filled with resolve. "The garden is not just a place of secrets. It is a map, a guide. Whoever left these letters wanted us to follow this path, to uncover the truth hidden at its center." As the night began to fall, the air grew colder, and the garden seemed to take on an even more eerie, silent presence. The stone tablet, with its cryptic symbol, now glowed faintly in the moonlight, as though it were waiting for them to solve the final piece of the puzzle. Holmes stood up, brushing his hands off. "We must return to the manor, Watson. The answer lies within that symbol, and the next part of this riddle is waiting for us. But we must be careful. Someone is trying to keep us from the truth." Watson, feeling the weight of the mystery settle around him, nodded. "But who, Holmes? And why?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with the excitement of a mind on the verge of discovery. "That, Watson, is the heart of the mystery, and we will uncover it step by step." Chapter 4. The Hidden Message. The night was quiet, the kind of serene silence that can only be found in the countryside, where even the stars seem to whisper secrets to the earth below. The garden, still fresh from the evening dew, stood as if frozen in time, silent, waiting. But within the walls of the manor, an air of tension had settled. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in the dimly lit drawing room, their minds working in sync as they prepared to unravel the mystery that had taken them deeper into the heart of Lady Eleanor's troubled past. The symbol in the garden, the labyrinth etched into the stone tablet, had been the first breakthrough. But even as they left the garden behind, Holmes couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. The garden had opened a door, but it had not yet revealed all its secrets. Holmes, his ever analytical mind racing, sat with the stone tablet before him on the table. Watson, equally absorbed, leaned in, studying the intricate pattern with a furrowed brow. "You're certain this symbol is connected to the letters?" Watson asked, his voice low, as though speaking too loudly might disturb the quiet unfolding of the mystery. Holmes nodded, his fingers brushing the tablet's worn surface. "Yes, Watson. The symbol is unmistakable. It's an ancient one, a symbol of passage, a labyrinth. The maze represents a journey, but not just any journey, a journey toward the truth. Whoever left this symbol wanted to ensure the path was clear for someone to follow, but they also wanted to ensure that the journey was not easy." Watson's eyes narrowed. But why hide it so well? Why the deception, the secretive letters, the garden? Why all of this? Holmes exhaled slowly, his gaze never leaving the stone. That is the question we must answer. Whoever set this in motion, whether it be Lord Henry or someone else, had a reason for creating this elaborate puzzle. I believe it is not just about love or regret. There is something more, something hidden behind the veil of the past. Lady Eleanor, who had been silently observing from the corner of the room, now spoke, her voice soft yet filled with an urgency that could not be ignored. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I've been thinking about the garden and about the letters. There's one thing I haven't told you yet. The letters, they're not all signed with just Lord Henry's name." Holmes's head snapped up, his interest piqued. "Not signed with Lord Henry's name? What do you mean, Lady Eleanor?" Lady Eleanor hesitated, her hands nervously twisting in her lap. "The first few letters, yes. They were addressed to me by my husband, Lord Henry. But there were others, later ones, that were addressed to someone else. A name I do not recognize. Someone called Catherine. It's as though the letters were not just from him to me, but to someone else as well." Holmes stood up suddenly, his mind already turning the new information over in his head. "Catherine," he muttered, pacing the floor. "This is a new layer to the puzzle. Lord Henry, was there another woman? Or is this someone entirely different?" Watson watched Holmes carefully, his thoughts racing. "You think the letters were not just from Lord Henry, but from someone else? A third party involved in all of this?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "It's possible. But what does this Catherine have to do with the labyrinth, with the hidden message in the garden? Why was she mentioned in the letters? And why would Lord Henry's correspondence to you contain her name?" Lady Eleanor, her voice barely above a whisper, added, "I found one of those letters in the garden, Mr. Holmes. The others, they were sealed and kept in a box, but one was left for me to find. It was the one with Catherine's name on it. I had no idea who she was at the time, but now I fear there's more to the story. I think it may hold the key to understanding all of this." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a sudden realization. This is it. The final piece. "We need to see that letter, Lady Eleanor. It may contain the clue we've been searching for." Lady Eleanor stood and hurried to a nearby cabinet, retrieving an old weathered envelope. Her hands trembled as she handed it to Holmes. The paper was fragile, its edges curling with age, but Holmes's fingers moved with the grace of someone who had handled such delicate things many times before. He carefully peeled back the seal and unfolded the letter. Watson leaned in as Holmes began to read aloud. "My dearest Eleanor, I write to you from a place of sorrow, for my heart cannot bear the weight of my secret much longer. The path that has brought me to this point is one I never anticipated, but it is a path that I must follow. Catherine is not just someone from my past. She is someone from our past, a past you and I shared, though you have forgotten it. It is not her fault, nor mine, but the truth must be told. I fear that you will never understand, but I must leave these words behind for you to find, in the hope that you will one day remember. The labyrinth you now find yourself in is the key to everything. The garden, the letters, they are part of the journey I took long ago, and the only way to find the truth is to follow the path. You must find Catherine, Eleanor. She is the one who holds the final piece of the puzzle, the key to your heart and to your future." Holmes paused, his gaze fixed on the letter. There was a heavy silence in the room as the words settled around them like a fog. Watson spoke first, his voice low and uncertain. "Catherine. Who is she, Holmes? And why is she tied to all of this?" Holmes looked up, his eyes intense. "The answer is not as simple as it seems, Watson. This letter, this hidden message, tells us that Catherine is the key to unlocking the mystery. But it also hints at something more. Eleanor, your husband, Lord Henry, was not just writing to you. He was writing to someone else. Someone who knew you both, someone who shared in your past. And it is she who holds the final truth." Lady Eleanor, her face pale, seemed to collapse inward, as though the weight of the revelation was too much to bear. "Catherine," she whispered, as if trying to remember something from the depths of her mind. Holmes's voice softened. "Lady Eleanor, we need to find Catherine. She is the person who can finally bring the truth into the light." The room was silent once more. The mystery, once filled with cryptic letters and shadows of the past, had now become more real, more urgent. Holmes could feel the tension in the air, the sense that they were getting closer to the heart of the matter. But there was also a quiet dread that hung over him, for he knew that whatever truth they uncovered would not be easy to face. As Holmes and Watson left the drawing room, the night stretched out before them, dark, silent, and full of unanswered questions. The labyrinth in the garden had led them this far, but they had yet to reach the center. The final steps of their journey would reveal the truth. But at what cost? Chapter 5. The Garden of Closure. The morning after the revelation of Catherine's name was a grey one. The sky heavy with clouds, the air thick with unspoken tension. The mystery, which had begun so innocently with a handful of forgotten letters, now seemed to spiral deeper into a labyrinth of secrets and half-truths. Holmes, his mind always sharp and alert, felt the pull of the unknown more strongly than ever before. Each twist in the tale only deepened the enigma. And yet, there was something within him that sensed they were nearing the final chapters of this long and winding story. Lady Eleanor, too, had been unsettled by the discovery of the letter. Her face, usually composed, now showed signs of wear, the weight of her husband's secrets pressing down on her. She had been a woman of strength, but this new revelation about Catherine, and the implication that her past held pieces of the puzzle she had long since buried, was unraveling her. She had begun the journey looking for closure, but now, it seemed, the search had become more about finding truth than peace. Holmes sat in the drawing room, the stone tablet still lying on the table before him, its labyrinthine symbol casting shadows in the dim light. Watson, who had been quiet for some time, could sense the growing urgency in Holmes's demeanour. "We must go to the garden again, Watson," Holmes said suddenly, his voice carrying a sense of finality. "The clues are scattered like breadcrumbs, but we have yet to find the place they lead to. Catherine is the key, and the garden is where we'll find her, figuratively speaking at least." Watson stood, his brow furrowed. "You believe the garden holds the answers, Holmes? But we've already searched it from every angle." Holmes's eyes flickered toward Watson, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Not every angle, Watson. Not every one." The two men made their way outside, the air still cool but with a refreshing bite to it. As they approached the garden, the once lush greenery now appeared to have taken on an almost sombre tone. The ivy seemed to have grown thicker, the flowers less vibrant, as if the garden itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover the final truth. Holmes's eyes scanned the garden with the intensity of a hawk, his mind mapping out every turn, every twist, every overgrown corner. They made their way to the farthest corner once again, the place where the bench had stood, where the stone tablet had been hidden. This was where the final answers lay. Holmes could feel it. Watson, though still uncertain, followed his friend's lead. "Holmes, what exactly are we looking for this time?" Holmes didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the stone wall that had been the site of their last discovery. Instead, he crouched down, his fingers brushing the earth where the ivy had been pulled away. He moved slowly, carefully, as though he were unlocking a door no one had dared to open in centuries. As his hand skimmed the surface, a faint but unmistakable click sounded from beneath the soil. Holmes paused, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. "This is it," he murmured. With Watson's help, they cleared away the remaining earth and ivy, revealing a small, hidden compartment in the stone. It was a narrow recess, carved into the wall itself, and it was filled with dust and age-old debris. But inside, nestled carefully within a weathered box, was something more, something that had been hidden for years. Holmes gingerly lifted the box and opened it. Inside, wrapped in a delicate piece of cloth, was a small, ornate key. It was made of brass, its edges intricately carved, and it looked ancient, almost otherworldly. But what struck Holmes most was the familiar design engraved into the key, an intricate labyrinth pattern, identical to the one on the stone tablet. "The final piece," Holmes whispered, his voice filled with awe. "The key to the mystery." Watson leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "But what does it open, Holmes? Where does this key fit?" Holmes stood, holding the key in his hand like a treasure. His mind raced, connecting the dots, piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. "I believe," he said slowly, "it fits the lock in the old library, the one Lady Eleanor never allowed us to explore." Watson's eyes widened. "The library? But why would there be a lock there? And why keep it hidden all these years?" Holmes's gaze softened. Lady Eleanor's husband, Lord Henry, wanted the truth to be revealed, but only to those who could follow the clues. He did not want to burden his wife with the knowledge too soon, and now, it seems, the time has come. Together they made their way to the manor's library, a grand room filled with towering shelves of ancient books and dust-laden tomes. The library, which had once been a place of knowledge and refuge, now felt strangely distant. But as Holmes approached the farthest wall, he paused in front of an old oak door, hidden behind a curtain of vines that had long since overtaken the space. Holmes turned the key in his hand, his fingers brushing against its intricate design. "This key," he said quietly, "was meant for this door. And behind it, Watson, we will find the answers we seek." With a twist, the key slid easily into the lock, and the door creaked open, revealing a small room, no larger than a closet. But inside, instead of books, there were drawers, dozens of them, each one meticulously labelled, and among them, one drawer stood out, labelled with the name Catherine. Holmes's heart quickened. He approached the drawer with careful steps, and as he pulled it open, he found a collection of papers, all tied together with a red ribbon. Holmes gently untied the ribbon, unfurling the contents with a reverence that spoke of the weight they carried. As he scanned the papers, his expression grew more intense, his eyes flicking from word to word, absorbing the truth contained within. Watson, standing beside him, could barely contain his anticipation. "Holmes, what is it? What have we found?" Holmes's voice was steady, but his words carried the finality of a conclusion long awaited. "These are letters, Watson. Letters from Catherine. And they tell a different story altogether. The letters were not just love letters, but confessions, letters that revealed a web of deceit and hidden relationships. Catherine, it turned out, had been much more than an acquaintance. She had been deeply involved with Lord Henry, even before Lady Eleanor came into the picture. And the labyrinth, both in the garden and in the letters, represented the twisting, complex journey of love, guilt, and redemption. Holmes leaned back, his fingers still clutching the letters. "The truth, Watson, is that Lord Henry's love for Eleanor was a complicated one. He kept Catherine's existence a secret, not out of malice, but out of a desire to protect Eleanor from a truth that would have broken her heart." Lady Eleanor, who had followed them into the room, stood frozen at the doorway, her face pale as she absorbed the gravity of what had just been revealed. "So," she whispered, "Catherine was the other woman, the one who shared his love, his life, but not his heart." Holmes nodded. "Yes, Lady Eleanor. But what you must understand is that Lord Henry's love for you was genuine. He did not want to hurt you with the truth, which is why he kept Catherine's letters hidden. The garden, the labyrinth. It was all part of his plan to ensure that, when the time was right, you would find the answers on your own." A deep, emotional silence fell over the room. Lady Eleanor, standing in the midst of her husband's hidden past, took a long breath, as if the weight of the years had finally begun to lift from her shoulders. "And now," she said softly, "I can finally understand." Holmes gave her a gentle smile, his usual sharpness softened by the weight of the moment. "Yes, Lady Eleanor. Now you can finally find closure. The mystery of the garden, the letters, and Catherine had been solved. The past, with all its secrets and shadows, was now laid bare. And as Holmes, Watson and Lady Eleanor stood together in the quiet of the library, the labyrinth had come full circle, each twist and turn leading to the centre of a truth that had been hidden for so long. And in that moment, the garden of forgotten letters had become a garden of closure, where the past could finally rest, and the future could begin anew. Chapter 6. The Return of Peace. The day had turned to dusk when Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stood in the drawing room of Lady Eleanor's estate. The air, thick with the weight of revelation, seemed to settle in around them, soft and quiet, like the slow, steady fall of evening rain. The letters, the labyrinth, the key, all the pieces of the puzzle had finally come together, revealing the deep and complicated story behind Lord Henry, Catherine, and Eleanor. Yet, even as the truth was laid bare, a sense of peace, albeit fragile, began to replace the tension that had hung over the estate for so long. Holmes, ever the calm presence amidst the storm of emotions, sat by the fire, his fingers gently tapping the armrest of the chair. Watson, having witnessed the entire unravelling of the mystery, could not help but reflect on how strange it was that such a delicate and hidden truth could now bring some form of resolution. It was as though the garden, once filled with secrets and shadows, had finally begun to bloom in the light of understanding. Lady Eleanor, her expression softened, but still shadowed by the weight of the past, stood by the window, gazing out into the garden. The ivy that once seemed so ominous now appeared almost gentle, a testament to the change that had swept over the estate since Holmes's arrival. "Holmes," Watson began, his voice quiet but filled with a mix of curiosity and relief. "Do you think Lady Eleanor will find peace now that the mystery is resolved?" Holmes, without shifting his gaze from the fire, spoke thoughtfully. "The past has a way of remaining with us, Watson, even when we think we have put it to rest. The truth, as painful as it may be, has a way of bringing closure, though closure does not always mean forgetting." Watson nodded, understanding. "And Lady Eleanor?" Holmes glanced up at Lady Eleanor, who still stood at the window, her figure silhouetted against the dimming light. "She has been through much, Watson. But now, at least, she can see the truth for what it is. There is no more mystery to chase, no more shadows to follow. Her journey, though difficult, has brought her here, and for that, there is peace to be found." The air in the room was quiet again, the crackle of the fire the only sound breaking the stillness. Watson, lost in thought, glanced toward the garden. He could see the faint outlines of the rose bushes, their petals still fresh despite the autumn chill. It was almost as though the garden, too, had been waiting for the mystery to resolve, for the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place before it could return to its natural, peaceful state. Holmes, sensing Watson's contemplation, spoke again. "You see, Watson, that is the power of truth. It doesn't erase the past, but it can bring clarity. The garden, once a place of hidden messages and secrets, now represents something different. It symbolizes growth. Growth not just of the flowers, but of the people who tend to it." Watson smiled softly. "And the labyrinth?" Holmes chuckled quietly. "Ah, yes, the labyrinth. It was never just a physical maze, Watson. It was a metaphor for the journey we all take in life, a winding path filled with twists and turns, secrets and revelations, and ultimately, choices. Lady Eleanor has walked that path, and though it was difficult, she has found her way out of the labyrinth. Now she can move forward." As if on cue, Lady Eleanor turned from the window, her eyes meeting Holmes's with a softness that had not been there before. The intensity of her grief had lessened, replaced by something quieter, a sense of release, of finality. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice still gentle but carrying a newfound strength. "I cannot thank you enough for what you've done. You've given me something I thought I would never find, the truth. And with it, a sense of peace I thought I had lost long ago." Holmes rose from his seat, his expression warm but measured. "Lady Eleanor, the truth was always within reach. You simply needed to be ready to see it. I am glad that I could assist you in finding it." Watson, observing the exchange, was struck by the change in Lady Eleanor. She was no longer the woman who had greeted them with trembling hands and eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. She stood before them now, a woman who had faced the ghosts of her past and emerged stronger, her heart lighter. The burden of the unknown had been lifted, and the weight of the past no longer held sway over her. As Holmes, Watson, and Lady Eleanor sat down together, the fire crackled softly in the background, casting a warm glow over the room. The mystery of the garden, of the letters, and of Catherine had been solved, and with it, a sense of closure had descended upon them. Lady Eleanor spoke once more, her voice tinged with gratitude. "It feels as though a cloud has lifted. For so many years I carried this weight with me, thinking that I could never move forward. But now I understand. Lord Henry's love for me, his mistakes, his regrets, all of it has become clear." Holmes's voice softened as he replied, "The past, Lady Eleanor, will always be a part of you. But now that you understand it, you can choose how to carry it. You are no longer defined by the secrets of the past. You are free to define your own future." Lady Eleanor nodded, her eyes closing for a brief moment as she processed his words. When she opened them again, there was a quiet resolve in her gaze. "I will find peace, Mr. Holmes. I will learn to live with the truth, and I will honour Lord Henry's memory, not with bitterness, but with understanding." The conversation drifted into more comfortable topics as the night wore on. The fire began to die down, casting long shadows across the room, but the atmosphere remained calm and serene. Watson, content to let the moment pass without further interruption, sat back in his chair, savouring the rare feeling of completion that accompanied the resolution of a case. As the evening turned to night and the last embers of the fire glowed faintly, Holmes rose from his chair and adjusted his coat. "It's time we took our leave, Watson," he said quietly. Lady Eleanor stood as well, walking them to the door. As she reached out to shake Holmes's hand, her expression was one of quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for everything." Holmes gave her a brief, knowing smile. "It was my pleasure, Lady Eleanor. Remember, peace is not something that is given, it is something that must be earned, and you have earned it." With that, Holmes and Watson stepped out into the cool night air, the garden now bathed in moonlight, peaceful and still. The mystery was over and the world seemed quieter for it. The garden, once a place of confusion and fear, had become a place of closure, a place where the past could finally rest and the future could begin. As they made their way back toward London, the gentle hush of the evening settled around them, and Holmes, ever thoughtful, looked up at the stars above. "It's not often, Watson," he said softly, "that we find such resolution in a case. But sometimes the journey itself is as important as the destination, and I believe Lady Eleanor has learned that, just as we have." Watson nodded in agreement, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, Holmes. A journey indeed, and one that has brought peace to a troubled heart." With that, they walked on into the quiet night, the mystery of the garden now behind them, and the promise of peace ahead. Chapter 7. The Final Clue. The morning after Lady Eleanor had found peace was still, almost unnervingly so. The air was fresh and cool, a light mist hanging over the garden as if the world itself were still holding its breath. Sherlock Holmes, however, was not one for lingering in the past, no matter how resolved it seemed. His mind, as sharp as ever, had begun to circle back to one last detail, one piece of the puzzle that he had not yet fully explored. "Watson," he began quietly, standing at the window of the drawing room, his eyes scanning the garden below. "There is something I have yet to consider fully. We know the truth of Lord Henry's intentions, of Lady Eleanor's understanding, but there is still a lingering question." Watson, who had been quietly reading through some of his notes, looked up. "What is it, Holmes? Surely we've reached the end of this puzzle." Holmes turned to face him, a glimmer of thoughtfulness in his eyes. "Not quite. We have uncovered the most important pieces, yes, but there is something that nags at me, something we may have missed. The labyrinth symbol, the letters, the garden itself, they were all leading to something deeper. We have traced every step, but one last clue remains." Watson, intrigued as always, stood up, his curiosity piqued. "And what is this final clue, Holmes?" Holmes paused for a moment before replying, his voice tinged with mystery. "The key, Watson. The brass key we found, the one with the labyrinth engraved on it. It wasn't just a symbolic key to a hidden door. It was a key to understanding the final part of Lord Henry's secret. The truth lies in that key, and I am certain it will reveal something we've yet to discover." "How so?" Watson asked, his brow furrowed. "We already unlocked the door to the library, and Catherine's letters were there. What more could there be?" Holmes smiled faintly, his eyes alight with understanding. "We've unlocked the surface of the mystery, Watson, but not the core. There is more hidden in plain sight, and I believe the final piece is waiting for us in the garden itself." The two of them made their way back to the garden. The sunlight had begun to pierce through the morning mist, casting golden rays over the familiar, once mysterious space. Holmes walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings with renewed intensity. The garden, which had once felt like a labyrinth of secrets, now appeared to be open, accessible, but still, there was an air of untold stories waiting to be uncovered. They reached the stone bench where it had all started. The ivy, now carefully pruned by Lady Eleanor's hand, lay spread across the stonework, casting long shadows. The bench, once a place of sorrow, had now become a silent witness to the resolution of the mystery. But Holmes wasn't focused on the bench itself. Instead, he walked toward the ivy-clad wall nearby, his fingers brushing the stone as if seeking a hidden passage once more. Watson watched Holmes, intrigued but uncertain of what exactly his friend was searching for. "Holmes," he called quietly, "what is it you're looking for?" Holmes's face remained focused, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The key, Watson. It was a key that led us to answers, but it also may have been a key to something that's yet to be discovered, something here, hidden in the garden." Without another word, Holmes began to move the ivy aside, his fingers working nimbly but with care. It was as though the wall itself were holding its breath, waiting for Holmes to unlock its final secret. His eyes flickered with recognition as his hand brushed against something that wasn't stone, a slight indentation in the wall, almost imperceptible unless you knew where to look. "Here it is," Holmes said softly. His voice had a note of satisfaction, but also something deeper, an understanding that they were about to uncover the final chapter of the mystery. Holmes produced the brass key from his pocket, its labyrinthine pattern gleaming in the soft morning light. He inserted it into the indentation in the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. No click, no movement. But then, with a soft turn, the wall before them shuddered slightly. The ivy that had once obscured it pulled back, revealing a narrow hidden door in the stone. It was a door that had been there all along but had remained invisible to the untrained eye. Watson, his breath catching, stepped forward. "Holmes, is this—" Holmes nodded. "Yes, Watson. This is the last piece of Lord Henry's secret, a place where the final truth has been kept. It was never meant to be discovered by just anyone. It was designed for someone who could follow the clues, piece together the fragments, and understand the real story." The door opened with a quiet creak, revealing a small hidden room beyond. It was a room unlike any other in the estate, a room that had been untouched by time. It was filled with old books, photographs, and objects that seemed to belong to another age. But in the center of the room, on a pedestal, was a single object, an ornate box, its surface covered in intricate carvings that matched the labyrinth symbol perfectly. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a quiet excitement. "This, Watson, is the final secret. This box contains the last part of Lord Henry's message, and it is the message that will bring us full circle." As Holmes carefully opened the box, Watson leaned in, eager to see what was hidden within. Inside there was a single piece of paper, a letter, folded neatly and carefully placed inside. Holmes unfolded it with the same reverence he had shown every other clue. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lord Henry's. Holmes read aloud. "To my dearest Eleanor, by now, I know that the truth of our lives together has been revealed to you. I could not keep my secrets forever, though I hoped I could protect you from the pain of the past. Catherine was a part of my life, one I regret, one I cherish. But above all, I want you to know that my love for you has always been true. The labyrinth we have walked together, Eleanor, is one of my own making, and you have always been the one to guide me out. The key, which you have found, was the last piece of the puzzle I created, and now it is yours to keep. I hope you will remember the love we shared, even when it was hidden in shadow." With all my heart, Henry Holmes lowered the letter, his voice quiet, almost reverent. This final clue, Watson, was not about revealing a hidden love or unmasking a betrayal. It was about Lord Henry's final act of love, giving Lady Eleanor the freedom to find peace, to understand the past, and to carry forward into the future with clarity. Watson, deeply moved by the sincerity of the letter, nodded. So it wasn't just about the truth, but also about healing. Henry wanted Eleanor to move forward, not burdened by the past. Holmes smiled, his eyes reflecting a rare tenderness. "Exactly, Watson. The labyrinth was never just a maze. It was a path, leading her to closure, leading her to a place where she could let go of her doubts and find the peace she sought." Lady Eleanor, who had followed them into the room, stood in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears. She had not expected this, had not expected to find not just closure, but a gift from her late husband, the chance to heal, to forgive, and to remember the love they had shared without the shadows of guilt or regret. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for showing me that the labyrinth was never meant to trap me. It was meant to guide me." Holmes nodded, his face softened with quiet satisfaction. "You've walked the path, Lady Eleanor. Now you are free to choose your future." As they all stood in the small, hidden room surrounded by the quiet echoes of the past, a sense of finality settled over them. The mystery had been solved, but the answers had not just brought resolution, they had brought peace. The labyrinth, once a symbol of secrets and shadows, had now become a symbol of release. And with that, the final clue was found, and the garden, once a place of hidden letters and tangled memories, was now a place of closure, where the past could rest and the future could begin anew. Chapter 8. A quiet revelation. The days had passed since Holmes, Watson and Lady Eleanor had uncovered the final truth, the labyrinth of the garden, the letters, the labyrinthine key that had unlocked Lord Henry's final secret. A sense of tranquility now settled over the estate, as though the very earth had exhaled after holding its breath for so long. The once ominous garden had transformed into a serene sanctuary, a place of reflection and release. The oppressive silence that had once hung over Lady Eleanor was now replaced by a quiet understanding. The past was no longer a heavy weight, but a gentle companion, something she could look upon with acceptance rather than fear. But as Holmes and Watson prepared to leave the estate for good, there was a sense that the mystery, though resolved, had left something in its wake, a lingering feeling of closure, but also of curiosity. Not every thread had been fully examined, and as Holmes often said, some questions need to be answered, even when the answers might not seem necessary. It was late afternoon when Holmes and Watson stood in the garden once more. The sky above them was painted with hues of soft orange and purple, the evening sun casting long shadows on the well-tended pathways. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses and damp earth. "Holmes," Watson said quietly, breaking the silence, "do you feel as though there's more to this story? More that we haven't yet uncovered?" Holmes turned his gaze toward Watson, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, Watson, I do. There's always more. Even in cases like this, where the final puzzle seems to have been solved, there are always lingering questions. The labyrinth was meant to guide Lady Eleanor toward closure, yes, but it also led us to a deeper understanding. And yet, there's still something unresolved, not with the mystery itself, but with the way it unfolded." Watson frowned, not quite following. "What do you mean?" "The mystery is over. The letters were found. Lady Eleanor has found peace. What more is there?" Holmes sighed softly, his gaze drifting toward the garden where the ivy climbed the stone walls, a symbol of growth and renewal. "You see, Watson, the truth wasn't just in the letters or in the key or in the garden itself. It was in the way the past and present intertwined. Lord Henry, Catherine, and Lady Eleanor, they all played their parts in a story that reached beyond the confines of this estate. And though we've uncovered what we needed to, there are still things left unsaid, untold." Watson blinked, the weight of Holmes's words sinking in. "But Holmes, surely the most important truth has already been revealed. Lady Eleanor understands what happened. She knows the truth about Lord Henry and Catherine. What more could there be?" Holmes didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the landscape around them, as if searching for something beyond the visible. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice soft yet filled with a quiet intensity. "Sometimes, Watson, the most significant revelations aren't the ones that come in dramatic moments. Sometimes the most important truths are those we come to realize quietly, on our own, when we allow ourselves to let go of the past." Watson was silent for a moment, letting the words linger in the air. He could sense that Holmes was leading him to something, but what exactly, he wasn't sure. "Holmes," Watson asked, his voice filled with curiosity, "are you suggesting that there's something Lady Eleanor still needs to know? Something that hasn't been fully revealed to her?" Holmes nodded slowly, as if confirming a thought that had been brewing in his mind for some time. "I think there's something more in the garden. Something that connects all the pieces, the letters, the key, and even Catherine. It's subtle, but it's there. And I believe it's the final piece of the puzzle. The The two of them made their way back toward the heart of the garden, the place where the mystery had begun. The stone bench, the ivy-clad walls, and the small hidden compartment in the stone. Holmes's steps were measured, each one filled with purpose. Watson followed, his curiosity piqued once more. As they approached the familiar spot, Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. There, beneath the ivy, something glimmered faintly in the dimming light. "Holmes, what is it?" Watson asked, his voice laced with intrigue. Holmes moved quickly, pushing aside the ivy with a practiced hand. Beneath the dense greenery, they found a small object, a locket, its surface polished and smooth, reflecting the last rays of the sun. Holmes picked it up carefully, turning it over in his hands. Watson's heart skipped a beat. A locket. But who? Holmes opened the locket with a quiet click. Inside there were two photographs, one of Lady Eleanor looking young and radiant, and the other of a man Watson did not immediately recognize. The photograph was faded, its edges curled with time. The man's features were soft, yet familiar. It was Lord Henry. Watson's eyes widened. It's Lord Henry. But why is this locket here? And why was it hidden? Holmes studied the locket carefully, his brow furrowed. This, Watson, is the final clue. The locket was not meant to be discovered in the same way the other pieces were. It was hidden here for a reason that goes beyond the letters and the labyrinth. Holmes closed the locket, the faint click echoing in the quiet garden. Lord Henry, even in his last days, wanted Lady Eleanor to know that despite the past, there was always love between them. But he also wanted her to understand that this love was not the only truth in her life. He wanted her to move forward, not just with the memory of their love, but with the freedom to embrace what lay ahead. Watson looked at Holmes, realization dawning. You mean, the locket was never just a keepsake? It was a symbol of the journey Lady Eleanor had to take, a journey that wasn't just about uncovering the past, but about finding the strength to leave it behind. Holmes nodded. Precisely, Watson. The labyrinth, the letters, the key. They were all part of the path that Lady Eleanor needed to walk. But this locket, this final piece, is the moment when she truly chooses to move forward. It's the quiet revelation, the understanding that the past, with all its pain and complexity, can be carried, but it doesn't have to define her future. The sun had nearly set by this time, casting the garden in a soft, golden glow. As Holmes and Watson stood together, the air felt lighter, as if the garden itself had finally exhaled, releasing its hold on the past. Lady Eleanor had walked the labyrinth of love, loss, and regret, and now she was free. Holmes, ever the observer, took one last look at the garden. "It's done, Watson. The last piece of the mystery is solved, and with it, Lady Eleanor can finally find the peace she deserves." As they left the garden behind, the evening air cool and gentle around them, Watson couldn't help but feel that the journey had been as much about understanding the nature of love and loss as it had been about solving a mystery. Holmes had once said that not all mysteries were meant to be solved with haste. Some, like this one, required patience, reflection, and the quiet moments of revelation that came when one least expected them. And as they walked away, the garden, its secrets now fully revealed, seemed to embrace them with a peace that only true understanding can bring. Chapter 9. The Return to Silence. The morning sun had risen gently over the estate, casting soft rays of light across the tranquil garden. The world seemed to be holding its breath, as though the garden itself, now bathed in golden light, was finally at peace. The mystery, which had started with whispers and shadows, had unraveled slowly, revealing hidden truths and long-buried secrets. Lady Eleanor, once a woman burdened by the weight of her past, now stood in the quiet serenity of the garden, the last threads of the labyrinthine puzzle now woven together. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson, having seen the final piece of the puzzle fall into place, were preparing to leave the estate. The case, which had seemed so complex and tangled, now felt as though it had been tied into a neat, albeit delicate bow. The garden, once a place of confusion and dread, had become a place of closure, a place where Lady Eleanor could finally breathe freely, no longer weighed down by the past. But as Holmes surveyed the garden one last time, a quiet thought lingered in the back of his mind. "Watson," Holmes said softly, his voice carrying a sense of finality, yet tinged with a quiet, unspoken thought. "There is something soothing about how this mystery has unravelled. The letters, the key, the labyrinth, they were all a means to an end. But in the end, it wasn't the unravelling that mattered most, but what Lady Eleanor would do with the truth once it had been revealed." Watson, standing at Holmes's side, took in the stillness of the garden. The air was cool and crisp, but there was a sense of calm in the atmosphere, an almost tangible sense of peace that had settled over the estate. "I understand, Holmes," Watson replied, his voice thoughtful. "It was never about the mystery itself. It was about giving Lady Eleanor the space to find her own peace, to understand her past so she could let it go." Holmes nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the garden as if looking for something he couldn't quite place. "Yes, Watson. The labyrinth was more than just a physical place. It was a journey. And Lady Eleanor, despite all the trials, has come through it, stronger and at peace. But sometimes—" Holmes paused, turning to face Watson with a contemplative expression. "Peace is the hardest thing to grasp when it's finally within reach." Watson, sensing that Holmes was working through something more profound than mere observation, waited in silence, his own thoughts reflecting the calm that had now settled over them both. Holmes sighed softly and then turned his gaze back to the heart of the garden. "We have solved the mystery, Watson. The letters, the hidden meanings, the labyrinth. It was all meant to lead Lady Eleanor to the truth. But now I wonder if there's more to this than we've yet seen." Watson looked at Holmes, confused. "More? But Holmes, the truth is clear. We've uncovered Lord Henry's final message. The love, the regrets, the reconciliation. It's all here, in these letters and the locket we found. Lady Eleanor can now live freely." Holmes turned to face Watson, his eyes searching. "Yes, Watson, but sometimes, even in the quietest of resolutions, there remains something lingering, something not yet understood. The garden is peaceful now, yes. The labyrinth is no longer a trap, but Lady Eleanor's journey is not over. There is one last thing I must consider." Before Watson could respond, Holmes was already walking toward the small bench where the mystery had begun, his steps purposeful. Watson followed, though he could sense that something was different now. Holmes had always been precise, and now there was an air of quiet reflection about him. It was as though he was taking one last look at everything before he moved on. As they arrived at the bench, Holmes crouched down, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. Watson watched closely, but this time there was no urgency in Holmes's movements, only a careful, deliberate study of every detail. "Holmes, what are you looking for?" Watson asked, his voice low. Holmes didn't respond immediately, but instead reached into the ivy that had grown around the base of the bench. His fingers brushed against something soft, something hidden beneath the leaves and tendrils. With a quiet sense of satisfaction, Holmes pulled out a small, delicate object, another locket. This one, however, was different. It was smaller, more intricate, and its surface was etched with an elaborate pattern that seemed to mirror the labyrinth that had defined the mystery. Holmes's fingers lingered on the locket's surface for a moment before he opened it carefully. Inside, there was no photograph this time, no faded image of Lady Eleanor or Lord Henry. Instead, there was a single, neatly folded piece of parchment, the edges yellowed with age. Watson leaned in closer as Holmes unfolded the paper, his brow furrowed with both curiosity and concern. As Holmes began to read aloud, his voice carried the weight of the revelation. "To my dear Eleanor, you have discovered the heart of the labyrinth, but there is still more you must learn. The love I felt for you and the regrets I have carried are only part of the story. There is something more, something hidden that only you can uncover. The garden holds the final answer. But it is not a question of love. It is a question of what you will do with the freedom you have found." Holmes's voice trailed off as he finished reading the letter, his mind racing. "This," he murmured, "is what I feared, Watson. This is the part of the mystery that was never meant to be uncovered. Lord Henry's final act of love was to guide Lady Eleanor toward peace. But this locket, this letter, is the true test of her journey. It was always meant for her to choose her own path after the truth had been revealed." Watson's expression grew somber as he understood the implications. "So, this isn't just about uncovering secrets anymore. It's about Lady Eleanor's decision to move forward, to live her life freely, without being haunted by the past." Holmes nodded slowly. "Exactly, Watson. The labyrinth led her to the truth, but now she must walk away from it. The choice is hers, and hers alone. The love, the loss, the regrets, they are all part of the past. The future is what she must decide for herself." As Holmes and Watson stood in the quiet garden, the air heavy with the weight of the revelation, they both understood that the story of Lady Eleanor's journey had taken one final turn. The mystery was not about finding answers. It was about what those answers meant and what Lady Eleanor would do with them. Lady Eleanor, now standing in the doorway, watched the two men with quiet eyes. She had heard the last words, and she understood. Holmes, with his keen perception, had known that the final challenge wasn't to uncover the last secret, but to leave Lady Eleanor with the freedom to make her own choice, to step out of the labyrinth and into a new life. Holmes gave her a small, knowing smile. "You have the key now, Lady Eleanor. The past has been laid bare, but the future is yours to create." Her eyes shone with a quiet, bittersweet understanding as she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for showing me the way." And with that, the three of them stood in the garden, silent, yet at peace, knowing that the true end of the mystery had come not in the form of a final revelation, but in the quiet choice that Lady Eleanor would make from that moment onward. The garden, once filled with questions and secrets, had become a place of calm resolution. The labyrinth was no longer a maze. It had become a path to freedom. Chapter 10. The Final Goodbye. The estate was quieter than it had been in months. The winds of autumn had carried away the last traces of the summer's heat, and a gentle chill had settled over the garden, as though the world were drawing in a breath after the storm. The mystery of the garden, the labyrinth, the letters, everything that had brought Holmes and Watson to this place was now complete. Yet, as they stood at the edge of the garden, there was an undeniable sense that something had changed, not just within the walls of the estate, but within themselves as well. Holmes had always found solace in the resolution of a case, but this one, this delicate mystery of love, loss, and the search for peace, had left him with a quiet, reflective sense of satisfaction, tinged with something else. It was as though the conclusion had unravelled more than just the mystery of the past. It had revealed something about the nature of truth itself and the fragile balance between facing the past and embracing the future. Watson, ever the perceptive companion, noticed the shift in Holmes's usual demeanour. There was a softness in his eyes, a trace of something akin to nostalgia as they walked through the garden one last time, the evening sun casting long shadows at their feet. "Holmes," Watson began, his voice gently breaking the silence. "Do you think Lady Eleanor will be all right now? She has the peace she longed for, but what comes next for her?" Holmes paused, his gaze following the path they had taken so many times over the past few weeks. The garden, once a place of uncertainty, now seemed calm, an oasis of serenity. "Watson, peace is a strange thing," Holmes replied thoughtfully. "It does not come easily, and it is not a permanent state. But for Lady Eleanor, I believe it will be enough. The past has been laid to rest, and she is no longer burdened by its weight. Now, the future is hers to shape." Watson nodded slowly, absorbing his friend's words. He could see the change in Lady Eleanor. The woman who had once greeted them with trembling hands and haunted eyes was now poised and composed, ready to face whatever lay ahead. It had not been an easy journey, but she had found her way through the labyrinth. And in the end, it was not just the truth of Lord Henry's secrets that had brought her peace, but her own acceptance of that truth. As they reached the edge of the garden, Holmes stopped and turned to Watson, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though he were contemplating something just beyond the present moment. "Watson, there is something more to this," Holmes said quietly. "Something beyond the case we've solved, beyond the labyrinth and the letters." Watson, always eager to understand Holmes's elusive thoughts, looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean, Holmes?" Holmes's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the last rays of the sun were beginning to dip below the trees. The sky was a rich tapestry of colours, deep purples, oranges and golds, a reminder that even endings had their beauty. "The case is resolved, yes," Holmes continued, his voice tinged with something deeper. "But what we uncovered here was not just a puzzle. It was a journey that showed us the complexity of the human heart, how love, guilt, and regret intertwine, and how, in the end, it is the choice to move forward that defines us." Watson watched his friend closely. "Are you suggesting that there is still something we've missed? Something we haven't fully understood?" Holmes looked at him, a small, thoughtful smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is simply that some mysteries are not meant to be solved with reason alone. Some mysteries are meant to be felt, understood through experience, and resolved with time. This case, Watson, was one of those." There was a long silence between them, as if the weight of the truth they had uncovered had settled into the quiet corners of their hearts. Holmes turned to face the manor one last time, his eyes scanning the windows and the doorways that had once seemed so full of secrets. Now, they seemed simply still. The echoes of the past had faded, leaving behind only the present. Later that evening, as the two of them sat by the fire, Lady Eleanor joined them in the drawing room. Her face, though soft with the weariness of the past, also carried a quiet strength. There was no longer any trace of fear in her eyes, no more uncertainty. She was at peace. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice calm but filled with gratitude. "I cannot thank you enough for all you've done. You've not only solved the mystery of the letters, but you've also given me the chance to understand my past in a way I never thought possible." Holmes, ever the composed figure, nodded gracefully. "Lady Eleanor, it was never about the mystery itself, but about you finding the strength to face it. You have done more than uncover the truth. You have embraced it, and in doing so, you have given yourself the peace you so desperately sought." She smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know now that my journey was never meant to be a solitary one. It was meant to be shared, to be understood, even if it was difficult. Thank you, both of you, for walking with me through it." Holmes gave her a final steady look, his voice quiet but sincere. "It was my privilege, Lady Eleanor. Sometimes the greatest mysteries are those of the heart, and you have solved yours." With that, Holmes and Watson rose, preparing to leave the manor and return to their lives in London. As they stood at the door, Lady Eleanor followed them, standing in the doorway with the soft light of the setting sun behind her. The garden, now calm and peaceful, lay beyond her, no longer a place of shadows, but a place of remembrance. Holmes paused for a moment, turning to face Lady Eleanor once more. "One last thing, Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "The labyrinth is no longer a prison, but a path, and now it is yours to walk as freely as you choose." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I will walk it with peace in my heart." With that, Holmes and Watson stepped into the quiet evening, the last chapter of the mystery now closed. As they walked down the path toward the carriage, the world around them seemed still, as if holding its breath. The garden, once a place of confusion, had become a place of resolution, a place where the past had finally been laid to rest. And with the closing of the door behind them, the final chapter had ended, leaving only the quiet, comforting sound of the evening breeze rustling through the trees, as if the garden itself had whispered its final goodbye. The end.